Do you find that a lot of people that are at the top feel like everyone, for lack of a better term, kisses their ass and that's hard for them?
True. I do think that. I think that, like they can spot it very quickly also. And I think that that's a really, that's a quick skill that they've developed and learned to have and sometimes to use to their benefit, I think, as well. If somebody is going to, help you in some way or make things more easier for you, that's a skill certainly that you can use or something you can leverage.
Yeah. Among the people you work with, I want to hear, what are the traits that you see most commonly? And one that I want to highlight, because you wrote an excellent article in your Substack about it. You said audacity. You wrote, a trait I see in people who reach the top 0.01% is audacity. What is that and how does it manifest itself?
To me, the audacity that I see in those who are at kind of the top percent of those that I work with is just the kind of the notion that they don't follow the rules that everyone else seems to follow, that are actually very artificial. Something I talk a lot about are kind of this notion of imaginary rules. And I feel like most people walk around with kind of, there's rules that we learn that are good for us, that are, about manners and navigating the world and not getting arrested and all of those things. But I think that there are rules that we just kind of societally kind of accept, like that you wouldn't just try for a contract with a major bank if you are a small company, or that, there are certain things that you can't ask for because of your station in life, or certain places you shouldn't go, or rooms you shouldn't be in. And what I notice is that there is almost a complete unawareness that they couldn't try for something, or they couldn't figure something out, or that there is a place that they couldn't find a way to get to. And that audacity to kind of go for these larger things that no one else would think that they deserve or should be in rooms in or trying for, is really how they skip steps that everyone else is still kind of walking through. We're all going, it's so crowded in the path that everyone takes, and they just get this really kind of side path that's this little dirt road, and they find a way to get to outcomes that most of us are still kind of trudging through and are probably 8 years away from, if we get there at all. And I find that just magical. It's just magical because once you do it once, you prove it to yourself that you can do it over and over again in various areas of life, and it works. It works a percentage of the time. And
Yeah.
even if it's a small percentage of the time, it's worth taking that bet.
So is it that they almost have a lack of an awareness at first that they have this? They're the type of person who accidentally went down the side path, and then they get there and they go, wait, I realized I took this side path. Hey, next time I actually see a side path, I'm going to take that every time. And then that sort of teaches them something.
I think that's an accurate description. I think that there are ways in which, they just will do things that other people would not do. And it doesn't always occur to them that they're doing it. It seems like, oh, well, why not try for this? What if it, one of the things that I wrote about was the disposition of what if it goes right instead of what if it goes wrong. I think that there's a lot of focus on the optimistic side of things rather than always looking at the things that could go wrong. It's ultimately kind of a mental way of kind of a mental framework for seeing the world, is that, what if it all goes right? It's an optimistic way of approaching things. And I think if most of us would adopt that, there's so much more that we would do.
Yeah. And I think it's the trying, seeing what happens. In today's world, you're probably not going to die. And that'll give you some evidence where you go, okay, well, maybe it didn't work out perfectly, but you probably learned something along the path in taking whatever big shot it was. And if it does go perfectly, like, bam, you're in a whole new realm. And you can just keep going back to the basket.
That's very true. I mean, and I think that we overestimate. There's something that we do that really looks at. We don't really calculate the appropriate risk. We look kind of, the way in which we evaluate situations seems to overestimate the real risk that exists in the choices that we make, instead of really looking at, well, is this actually the risk? Is this actually the thing that would go wrong? Or is it something that we just kind of would make us uncomfortable and we wouldn't want to have happen? there's usually not a lot of risk. And I think one of the things that's wonderful and terrible about social media is that you can see very quickly the fast cycle that even the worst things have. A terrible thing could happen and be incredibly embarrassing, and probably next week no one's going to talk about it.
Yeah.
There's such a short attention span in the mind of people that even if you do make a mistake, it's probably not going to be big enough that it lasts forever.
So when I was a professor at UNLV, the way I used to talk about this, how you see it in major media is, I think with the speed of media today, if you take something like the O.J. Simpson trial, that was all that was on television for like a year. And I think today that whole thing would maybe be a week or 2 weeks, and then it would just kind of forget about it. But I could see how that's a good tool to use in the context of, even if someone is criticizing you online, whatever it might be, even the criticism you hear in the office, it's like people are just going to move on. They forget.
They are, like someone was talking about whether or not we would disclose there were aliens among us. And I said, at this point, I think people would shrug and move on. It would be in the news for a few days. But yes, our attention is very brief.
Yeah. You also have a concept called the repetitive reflex. And it's this idea that high performers aren't great at everything. They're good at a couple things, but they're really relentless. Talk to us about that.
I think that one of the things that people assume about high performers, and we see this kind of halo effect where you'll see people who are really excellent at a few things. People assume that they're great at everything. They also assume that they know about everything. Like there's a lot of assumptions that we make, but that they are really, really good at a few things, and they dig into those things, and they don't try to execute on things that they really aren't that great at. And they're very, very good at kind of putting the things away from them that they're not that great at. I think a public example of this is Elon Musk. Fantastic at company building, fantastic at, bringing public attention to some of these things. But he has Gwynne Shotwell, who is a phenomenal operator in SpaceX, is notable for being able to do all of the things that he cannot do and he's not very good at doing. Being able to meet with NASA and iron out certain types of contracts, and being really great at managing the day-to-day on the ground, and all of those things, while he's able to set vision and see where the future may go and gather the resources that can take them there, and all of those other things that he tends to be very, very good at. And so I think that on a smaller scale, very, very good CEOs do the same, that they have areas that they're very good at and areas they're not that great at, and they don't judge themselves for that. I think oftentimes when people are in business, they think, I'm the CEO, so that means I have to be great with people, or I'm the CEO and it means that I have to know X, Y, and Z. And sometimes you're the CEO and you're not great with people. And so you hire people who are. And sometimes you're the CEO and you're, really fantastic technically, but maybe you're not the person who's best on some of these other variables. And so I do think that the thing that they do brilliantly over and over again is that they're okay with the strengths that they have. And they know that if they lean into them, you really get outlier outcomes. If you start as above average on something, and you're really gifted even at something, if you put force behind it, the separation between you and everyone else is dramatic. But if you are really above average on something and you're trying to focus all the time on the things that you're below average on, maybe you'll be able to bring those things up to average, maybe a little better. But that's not where you're going to gain leverage. That's not how you're going to get escape velocity on the things that you really want to push ahead. And so because they understand that, I think intuitively, they put a lot of force behind the things that they're great at. And they will do that over and over again. And maybe it's, M&A deals. Maybe it's, raising capital. Maybe it's some of these other things. And if they're exceptional at it, you're going to see them out there forming partnerships or doing those things all day long. And it really brings a lot of leverage to their business.
I feel like that's a good takeaway for someone who isn't a executive or founder as well. It's what are you inherently talented at? What are you good at? Lean into that. And then what can you maybe pass off to other people who are good at that? I'm sure it plays out in relationships, it plays out in day-to-day work, all these different areas.
That's very true. I mean, there are usually it's really funny. We laugh in my own household that there's always someone who's great at spreadsheets and somebody who's not. And the spreadsheet person is the person who, does all of these calculations, and the other person's like, this is what I think that I want. Like, this is what and the other person's always running the back end. That may not always be true, but I think it's often true. And so it's kind of funny. And you find that this even plays out at home with incredibly successful people that, there are things in their lives that they're not that great at, and they know they're not great at. I had a female CEO who I love, and she said, I had to decide, what the things were that were important to me to like being a great mom. And she didn't have a lot of time, and she's like, I couldn't be making cupcakes. That's not what being a great mom is to me. To me, it's spending time with someone. It's really getting to know them. It's having that quality. And so sometimes people judge, whether it's a man who's the head of a company or a woman who's the head of a company, like they're going to define their roles even at home in ways that like really can lean into strengths and things that really suit their lives.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that I am not the spreadsheet person of my home. That is, if my wife Leah is listening to this right now, she's going, yeah, that is not you.